I don't walk too far. It's got to cut out again. Welcome to the 2013 Ag Safety and Health demonstration. This year we're going to talk about the hazards of flowing grain. Every year in the United States, well, in the past, over a 7-year period in the United States, there were 100 deaths in flowing grain bins, flowing grain entrapments, resulting in 100 deaths in a 7-year period. So it's grabbed a whole lot of national attention. We don't see a lot of entrapments here in Pennsylvania, but we do see some, and we do see, what we are seeing are more farmers and more people putting up grain storage bins for storing grain because of high, good grain prices, but also bins to store other products for bioenergy products like wood pellets and those kinds of things. And what we're seeing is a lot of folks that may not have a whole lot of experience with grain, flowing grain, having a potential for danger. So we want to talk about those hazards this year. My name is Dave Hill. Helping with me is Bill Harshman and Dennis Murphy. We're all from Penn State University, the Ag Safety and Health program in the Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering. The hazards of flowing grain are not as obvious as other known hazards, farm hazards, but about half of the entrapments that we've seen here in Pennsylvania have resulted in fatalities. And so we take those things pretty serious, so the hazards are very serious. The victims in Pennsylvania have ranged in age from 2 years old, up to 78 years. So our demonstration today is designed to illustrate how quickly you can become trapped in a flowing material like grain, how difficult it is to get somebody out that's trapped in grain. We'll talk about the 3 typical ways people get caught in flowing material. And if you do come across somebody that's trapped in flowing material in grain, what are some steps that you should take to help them? And then finally, if you absolutely have to go into a bin, I want to talk to you about some safety precautions, some things that you can do to completely erase the possibility that you're going to die from entrapment in a bin. Okay? 2 of the biggest problems that people don't realize how fast grain can move out of a bin and how much force flowing grain can have on a person's body. While most of the incidents happen in flat-bottomed grain bins, like this, the same conditions exist in the gravity side unloading wagons and grain trucks. We've got a model of one here. Often the victim in the gravity wagon is a young child. Okay, next slide. As our poster shows, when grain is being unloaded by the auger, it is typically located in the bottom of the bin, in the bottom of the center. The flow of grain is off the top of the grain and down through the center. As Bill's pointing out here, and we can see it here where our child mannequin is. If this auger is running, the flow of material that's going to come out through the center of this bin is really going to come off the top and down through the center of the bin. The poster shows about 85 cubic feet of grain can be unloaded in a minute with a 10-inch auger. A lot of these bins have 10-inch augers, so when they're running, you're going to remove about 85 cubic feet per minute. Most of you may not understand what a cubic foot might be, so more typical quantity might be bushels. And relate to bushels, I can tell you that 85 cubic feet of grain converts to about 65 bushels. So we're talking about 65 bushels a minute that's being unloaded with a 10-inch auger. Well, the more important question is, what does that mean in terms of a human body? Because we're talking about people going inside a bin. If you have a person inside a bin, what does that relate to as far as bushels? If you look at the human body, we know that a 6-foot-tall person that weighs about 180 pounds will average about 12 inches around, and that results in that person having a volume of about 4.7 cubic feet. Now, if you had a calculator and you did the math, do those calculations, that 4.7 cubic feet would unload in about 3.3 seconds. Okay? Well, of course, that person that enters the top of the bin would have to get all the way to the bottom to be unloaded, and it would take a little longer than 3.3 seconds for this to happen. But you get the idea of a person being caught very quickly. Understanding how fast grain flows is only one part of the understanding of the total hazards of flowing grain. Here's another question. When does a person actually become trapped by flowing grain? Imagine yourself in a large round grain bin without a safety harness or anything to grab hold of, and you are being engulfed in the grain. How far down do you have to go before you're helplessly trapped? Do you have to be completely covered? Up to your shoulders? Up to your waist? Well, the answer is really that once you get down to your knees, once your knees are covered, you're going to need some help getting out. You can't get out by yourself if your knees are covered in grain. Grain exerts too much pressure and friction around your legs simply to lift your legs out. And remember, we're talking about you being in the bin while that auger's running. So the floor below you is always being removed. So even if you get to your knees and you're trying to step out, the grain is being sucked down below you. So it's like being on a down escalator and you're trying to go up. The escalator's going down all the time and you're being pulled down. I have another question for those of you that understand when you've walked in bins. When's the last time you actually stood on grain? Well, you don't stand on grain, as you know. You walk in grain. Every time you walk in the grain, you're instinctively you're going to sink down at least 6, 8, 10 inches, maybe even more, depending on your weight and your body size. So let's take a look and see how fast this happens. Putting all this together, we get an idea of how fast a person can be trapped and completely buried by flowing grain. As the poster shows, you start by being several inches. You remember you step in, you're about 6, 8, 10 inches deep to start with. You don't walk on grain, you walk in it. And if the grain is over your knees, it's still flowing from under your feet, you can be trapped as few as 5 seconds. And you can be completely engulfed, completely covered in about 25 seconds, 6-foot tall body. Let's show you on the demonstration unit here. We've placed our victim in the bin, and I'm going to open up the hatch like the unloading auger is running. That 10-inch auger is going to be running. Bill has a watch, and he's going to time how quickly we get this person caught. And remember, we're going to have them caught just to their knees. Okay, so she's in the bin, sunk in about 6 or 8 inches. Bill, when you're ready. Okay, 4 seconds for her to be covered, pulled down, like the unloading auger was running, and now she's going to need some assistance to get out of the bin. Next post. Now, because this person needs some help getting out, you may instinctively think, well, if I go up to the top of the bin and throw a rope in, this person can pull themselves out. And maybe that would be okay if the person is only up to their knees. But let's take a look at this poster. This poster helps identify how much strength it takes to pull out a 165-pound person trapped at various levels. Even when the grain is only at the knees, like we're showing here, this 165-pound person would need 170 pounds of force, an extra 5 pounds of force, to pull them out because of the force and the pressure that's going against the person's legs. Okay? Like I said, maybe that would work if the person was only up to their knees. Most people don't know how much they can lift. So we have a tug of war with grain device over here, and I've already identified a volunteer that's going to come in and pull out. Come on in. And this device is hooked up to a weigh cell. Okay, so when he pulls up on the rope, we can tell how much force he's being able to pull up. And I want you to pull up as hard as you can, unless you have a rope tied onto a person that you're trying to pull up. So go ahead and pull as hard as you can. Okay, 160 pounds. Okay, so he wasn't quite able to pull our weight of 170 pounds, but that's the best he could do. And, now, he was pulling from his legs. He was pulling standing up, really good shape, good condition and everything else, but that's not really what would be like at top of the bin. In fact, if this rope is coming in this side door and this person's over here, he'd actually be pulling a lot from his arms and shoulders. So now I want you to try, get on your knees, and grab that rope and try pulling, more like the condition that you'd be pulling if you were actually trying to pull somebody up. Go ahead.
75.
Okay, 75, 80 pounds. Usually what we find is, in real life, a person would be able to pull about half their capacity in comparison from when they were standing. And I want you to keep this number in mind too. We're talking about this person being caught to their knees and maybe needing 175 pounds. Let's figure that this person is caught to their waist and needing 300 pounds of force. They're not wearing any equipment, so you think, okay, I'm going to drop a rope down, I'm going to tie that rope around their armpits, okay, and then that's going to be what we pull them on. Think about what kind of force 300 pounds of force might do on a person that you're trying to pull up just with a rope around their armpit. I want you to keep that in mind because we're going to talk a little bit about that a little later. Okay, let's switch. Now, we've been talking about entrapment of a person going into a bin with the augers running. And you might be standing there saying, why on earth would people go inside a bin with an augers running? Well, the other type of entrapment is called a bridging. Grain bridges because it gets moldy. It's stored wet, it gets moisture, and it turns moldy and congeals and coagulates and gets masses. And when that happens, it will not flow properly. Now remember, we talked about the grain being flowing off the top of the bin as it's being unloaded. Well, it'll unload for a while, but if there's clumps in there, it's going to stop unloading. And what a farmer will do is go into the top, look in on top, and see that the surface looks okay. He knows that there's problems in there, so he's going to take a pole or a shovel or something and go in there and start breaking that up. I think you can see what the result's going to be if he goes in and walks on a cavity that might have formed underneath him. And this actually did happen in Erie County not too long ago. A farmer went in because the grain was not flowing properly. He got in there and fell through a cavity. So it does happen. Question becomes, how do I break up that bridging? Is it safe to walk on the grain? Well, unfortunately, this is a choice too many farmers make, and they go in very quickly. And the problem is, if that auger's running while he's doing that, think about now, after what you've seen here, how quickly he gets into that cavity, and then he gets pulled down very quickly. The results are fairly predictable. The bridge can collapse simply from the weight of them, or it can break in. In any case, most people that do break through and do get totally submerged in grain will die by suffocation. Okay, we have nearly the same situation with the gravity unloading wagons. Although the incidents with gravity flow wagons aren't as numerous, they can be just as deadly. The flow of grain is out a side door rather than the center, but the flow is still off the top and down through the center. The majority of these entrapments happen to kids 14 and under. What usually happens is the child falls into the grain while it is being unloaded and very quickly gets trapped against the unloading door. A small child may die from head trauma if they are partially passed through the unloading door, or the child simply gets covered and suffocates from grain going into the mouth. So again, I'm going to have Bill time this when the child goes completely submerged.
Now,
okay, see how quickly that happened? In 5 seconds time, this child was completely submerged. I'm going to go ahead and dig her out, because we're going to need to put more grain back in there. Okay, next slide. Now let's talk about the third type of entrapment that occurs in bins, and that is from a farmer. Sometimes the same conditions that cause bridging will cause a wall of grain to collect on side wall. And a farmer will go in instinctively to break that wall down, and I think you can tell by the poster here what's going to happen. If he breaks that wall free, that wall is going to break and come down on top of him. if the wall's taller than him and he starts breaking it at his height, it could cause the grain to collapse on top of him. Next poster. What surprises most people is if that wall breaks and covers this person, 12 inches of grain material, 12 inches of corn on a person is equivalent to about 300 pounds force. Okay, and that's just a lot of weight. And that if you get 300 pounds pressure on you, you're probably not going to get up. And so that's another way folks have died in result of grain bin. Now let's get back to our victim here in the bin. She's been waiting very patiently for us to help her out. We've already talked about how difficult it is to pull somebody out, and we've covered that. I want to talk about the strategies that rescuers will use if they're called. If you get a person caught in a bin and a rescue company has to get out. To show this a little better, I'm gonna bury her a little bit deeper so that we can show you some rescue cuts and what the rescue company is going to do. So I'm going to put her down to her chest. You can clearly see now that funnel, the grain came down off the top, coming down through the bottom. You can see all of this pressure coming against this person. What's going on with this person is she's now having some difficulty breathing because you got all this pressure in the whole bin coming against her chest cavity, and she's having a real tough time breathing. And we looked at the poster back there. It would take about 700 pounds of pressure to pull her out. That's not something you're going to be able to do. Some farmers have said, well, we just tie a rope around her and run the unloader. That's not a good thing either because you're pulling that person down. And in this situation, you have basically two options. One is to get the rescue company that's been trained to come in with rescue tube, and we'll talk about that a little bit, or the rescue company is going to come in and cut the side of the bin. Putting all this pressure against this person, we need to think of a way to get that pressure going the opposite direction. And so what we have built into this bin are some rescue doors. Fire company can come up with special tools and open up a rescue door, on make 2 cuts, 2 to 3, 4 cuts on the bin to pull that grain away from our patient. So Bill's going to run that one, I'll run this one, and let's go. See the problem that we have when we start unloading grain? We have to move it away from the grain, otherwise it'll stop flowing. That's probably good. I think you got the right idea. We would keep unloading this until we got to our patient. But you see, we're pulling that pressure away from our victim so that, number one, she can breathe easier, and then we can get them out a little easier. We can make access to get in there. But that's what's called cutting the grain bin and trying to make those rescue cuts. That's probably the quickest way of getting somebody out. The other next chart. That just shows what we just did, pull that grain away. The other way is the yellow rescue tube that's down here. That's a piece of equipment that's called a coffer dam. We've always talked about somebody gets trapped in a bin. You want to get in there and build some sort of barrier around that person so all that pressure is not coming against them. This is a commercial device that's out there. We're using this to train fire companies how to respond to these incidents better. And a lot of fire companies are able to purchase this equipment. Some feed mills are purchasing this equipment or have available to the fire companies. It's really specialized training. One of the things that we like to encourage the farm community is to check with their fire companies to see if they're equipped to handle an emergency inside a bin and provide training. But you see these bins, you can see the 2 pieces down there. This is a 6-piece rescue tube. We got it in 6 pieces so that the pieces can fit into your side door without having to cut the top of the bin. With 2 people, rescue people would go inside the bin and build this barrier around the person that's trapped. And then they would take a simple vacuum cleaner and vacuum out that grain so that they could actually walk themselves out, because there's ladder rungs on the inside of these chutes. Once a person can get himself free, he can probably climb right out of there, and give him a rope, and he'll be able to climb right out the bin. So that's the rescue tube. Okay, we want to end up talking about some prevention strategies. I told you that there were some strategies that we want to talk about on preventing. Obviously, we think that there really should be no reason anybody should ever go into a bin. There's technology out there, there's education out there, there's knowledge of how to harvest good quality grain and how to keep it in good quality. One of the things that we really want to encourage is putting signage on the bins, putting decals on doors telling people that grain bins are hazardous warning areas, prevent unauthorized entry, especially by children. If you have kids on the farm, make sure they understand the hazards of flowing grain, as well as workers and children. Harvest grain and keep it at good quality, and empty the bin only if absolutely necessary. We talk about lockout, tagout. If you have to go into a bin, for heaven's sakes, if you have to go into the bin, make sure you lock out that power. There should be absolutely no reason why you're in a bin with those augers running. Leading cause of death is farmers getting caught in a bin with the augers running. They get sucked down so quickly. So if you're going to go into the bin, lock out the power, get a padlock, and put it on there. Because if you're in there and somebody doesn't realize that you're in there, they may come and turn that auger on, and that's not a good thing. So make sure that auger's off if you have to go in there. If you have to get in and look at the quality of the grain, use inspection holes or grain level markers. If you've got bridges in there, try to figure out how can I break that bridge with a pole from above the bridge, and work from the top to the bottom when clearing grain on walls. The other piece of this is the safety harnesses. If you have to go in, make sure everybody's trained. You want to use, make it a two-person job. Any kind of a grain bin entry should be two people. One person that goes in should wear a full body harness. Remember when we were talking about the 300 pounds of force on the armpits? If we had to pull 300 pounds on Dennis, we could really do a lot of damage on him under his armpits. But now with the full body harness, and I'll talk about that, once he gets that hooked up, we're going to pull from him, and that's going to distribute that pressure all around his body. He's putting it on, show you how quickly that happened. We got straps going around him, we got straps coming around his leg. We're going to hook to him from behind here, and now if we have to put 300 pounds of force on him, we could do that without hurting him. The other piece is, if you have to go into a bin, wear the harness attached to a lifeline. The lifeline is attached to an anchor point. The lifeline's attached to an anchor point outside the bin where our attendant is managing that. So we created an anchor point here on the bin, and Dennis is able now to walk across the bin. The system that we have, he has to go out, he can go out. Bill is managing the line. If he comes back this way, Bill's going to take up the slack. So if Dennis falls into a cavity, he's only going to go so far because we have a lock built on our anchor. Can you demonstrate that? So if he fell into a cavity, you can see he's only going to go in whatever slack our attendant is giving him. When we say about 8 or 10 inches, 12 inches or something like that, he's not going to go completely under. And so that's going to, this system right here will avoid him going completely submerged and resulting in a grain bin entrapment, engulfment death. One of the things that you're doing, if you're thinking of putting up bins, you want to talk to your bin manufacturers, tell them that you want an anchor point. A lot of farm bins do not have adequate anchor points attached to them, so you have to install that. The other piece of this is a pulley on top, because if we were just connecting him with a rope through this side hole, he'd still be able to fall quite a ways because he's not being caught from above. And this is going to keep that rope above him as he's walking across the surface of the grain. Okay, want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this. Hopefully, if you have flowing grain, or you have grain bins, this has been some assistance to you. We will be here to answer any questions. If you want to take a look at the equipment we have, the rescue tube, some of these things, thank you very much. And we do have some handouts along the fence there too.